Hello and welcome back to Norman Island Live. I'm your host, Lewis Aaron, and today I come with a warning. Unlike the BBC at the weekend, I live in an attic flat and it is absolutely boiling. And it's over 30 degrees in my flat right now. So I have a fan on and a little bit of air conditioning because I'm bougie. It hopefully won't disturb the audio, but if you guys can hear it in the background, please let me know. And if you kind of just see me sorting myself out, maybe patting myself a little bit dry because I'm currently living in a sauna, you can laugh at me, but I just ask you not to judge. But in the meantime, I am joined by the fabulous Curtis. Curtis, did you edit the script to add in the word fabulous?
No, I didn't actually, but that's quite funny.
I can't remember putting that there. I thought that was you.
I did not meddle in the script. I promise you. This is your show and your show only.
I don't remember putting that in there. Is that a Freudian slip? I don't know. How hot is your flat right now?
Extremely hot, yeah. I went out today actually to the shops.
You went outside.
I went outside. I know. Felt like a big mistake. Big mistake. I had 2 showers. I have a fan upstairs, and that's not particularly good. So we've got a double whammy of a hot flat and not a particularly good fan. So we're gonna get through it though. I'm sure we will.
We're gonna get through it. If you guys see me struggling, just leave me be, please. Leave me be. But let's move on to what we're going to be talking about today. So coming up, we have the worldwide controversy that is Bob Villain at Glastonbury Festival and the death to the IDF chant, which has gone absolutely global. We've got the sales of F-35s and more on Palestine action because the court has allowed F-35 sales to continue, and Palestine action is rushing to court to stop them getting prescribed as a terrorist group. And Labour's welfare rebellion is continuing and there's changes. U-turn, U-turn, U-turn. Can Starmer last? So let's go on to the first story because I think everybody in the entire world has heard about this. So this weekend, rapper duo Bob Villain ignited controversy at Glastonbury after his performance included chants of death to the IDF and a condemnation that has followed from Western governments all over the world. And the problem is that those same Western governments are complicit in the Palestinian suffering. Now, I'm sure we've all seen the clip, so let's have a look.
The BBC decided they wouldn't broadcast the Glastonbury set of Irish band Kneecap today, I imagine, with the hope of probably avoiding any controversy. But if that was the plan, it failed. One of the bands that was shown live on the BBC today, just before Kneecap's appearance, decided they'd take matters into their own hands.
Free, free! Free, free! Alright, but have you heard this one, though? Death, death to the IDF! Death, death to the IDF! Death, death to the IDF! Death, death to the IDF!
Now, that has certainly caused quite the storm around the world. So the BBC, which live streamed the performance instead of Kneecap's performance to avoid any risk of them pulling a stunt on live TV, completely backfired. But the BBC now faces scrutiny from all sides. They can literally never win. While politicians and the media outlets have rushed to decry the incident, focusing not on the genocide that's currently unfolding in Gaza, but the performers' protest against it. Now, the reaction has obviously been very swift. Ofcom says it's very concerned. The BBC has issued an apology and MPs have demanded answers. But where is this outrage when journalists are killed, when children are bombed, and when famine is being weaponized? Now, since October 7th, tens of thousands of Palestinians have been killed. Most of them are women and children. Israel's relentless assault, condemned by humanitarian groups and experts, they continue with complete impunity, yet Western leaders and broadcasters largely stay silent or sanitize the truth. Now, many people think Bob Villain's act wasn't senseless hate, but a fury at a state of military force, the IDF, who are accused of war crimes by international bodies left, right, and center. Now, the words are provocative, but they reflect a growing moral frustration with the governments who issue statements but do nothing to stop the slaughter. Instead of demanding justice, they're punishing artists who dare call it out. Now, silencing voices of protest will not end the war. It only exposes the hypocrisy of the institutions more concerned with, decorum than genocide. Now, Curtis, I expect you've obviously got a lot to say about this. And do you think it's a catchy tune or an incitement to violence or something else?
I certainly do think it's a catchy tune, actually. And when the videotape was playing, I can't lie to the audience, I was dancing on in the background. I've got a lot to say about this, of course, as you can imagine. Well, first of all, I want to say the woke right wing, are in supportive of cancel culture, it seems. We've got many right-wing commentators saying this is disgusting. They're reveling in the fact that Bob Villan has had his, he's been dropped by his agency. The America has said that he cannot come to the country. What you've seen Sophie Corcoran say on Twitter, we should ban Glastonbury, which is funny because you can find many tweets of her saying that I support free speech and I don't believe in cancel culture. But of course, hypocrisy within the right wing is the modus operandi by them. So I'm not surprised about any of that. But since I last checked, the IDF isn't a protected characteristic. It's a military force. I mean, some people may find the chant crass, maybe offensive, but at the end of the day, what matters the most is what's happening in Gaza, as we all know. And it's the fact that our government, for so long, not just since the 7th of October, by the way, but has backed Israel since this entire occupation. Of course, it began with Britain. It began with the Balfour Declaration. We have created this because we wanted to use Israel as a settler colonial state. In fact, the creation of the Balfour Declaration, you could consider quite anti-Semitic because we used Jewish people. We wanted Jewish people to leave the country anyway. A lot of racists were involved in the creation of Israel, and we wanted them to do our bidding. So to be against the settler colonial project, I think is standing up for justice in of itself against anti-Semitism. That's one thing. But I think if you're finding people being outraged by some words, but you're not outraged at the fact that hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been slaughtered, women and children, I mean, of course, we know that 50% of the Palestinian population are children. If you don't find that morally repugnant, but you think that death to the IDF is disgusting, then you have no moral backbone. And I also want to draw attention to the fact that, and of course, look, we know that pro-Israel people and Zionists always twist everything to anti-Semitism. Whether it was the chant, was it Free Palestine, or From the River to the Sea, Palestine will be free. Of course, all that simply means is Palestinians should be free from occupation. Well, of course, the Zionists twisted that and said, what that means is that's a genocidal chant against Jewish people because you won't see Jewish people anywhere. It's not what it means. They twisted that. You'll note that Zoran Mamdani, who just won his primary in New York City to become mayor, or he's become the Democratic primary to potentially become mayor, they're trying to harangue him as anti-Semitic because he dares criticize Israel. And they use the quote because he said, globalize the Intifada. That's apparently anti-Semitic. Now, of course, the reason why they say it's anti-Semitic is because of the Second Intifada. And within that, buses were bombed, cafes were bombed. But they forget that the First Intifada was completely peaceful. Palestinians peacefully protested. And what did Israel do? They shot them down and gunned them down. So, of course, the Second Intifada was a resistance movement. And the term Intifada means resistance, resist your oppressors. It's nothing to do with anti-Semitism. And they twisted that. So Bob Villan is essentially kind of made it very, very clear, right? No mistake here. He's talking about the idea. There's no way you can twist that as anti-Semitic. But of course, they are doing that. And it's not just the extreme Zionists too. It's people within the Labour Party. I mean, to be fair, some people in the Labour Party are extreme Zionists. But Lisa Nandy, former Labour Friends of Palestine, by the way, said that attacking the IDF is anti-Semitic. What a gross and disgusting smear. What a gross thing to say. By the way, and if we're going to play this game, right, conflating the IDF and conflating Israel is in of itself anti-Semitic. There are many Jewish people who are disgusted with the Israeli genocidal regime. So that's my thoughts on that. Of course, I'm not surprised about the backlash from the establishment. Final thing I want to say on this, actually, before we go back to you. Look, there were thousands of people watching Kneecap, watching Bob Villan, and they chanted in agreement. It's not like Bob Villan said, death to the IDF, and everyone sort of fell silent. They all agreed. The question is, why is that? Rather than, just completely dismiss the anger outright, just investigate why that's happening. People, ordinary people, are very, very angry with Israel. They're disgusted. People are very, very angry with our government's complicity, and they're disgusted by it. So you can call Bob Villain whatever you want, but that anger isn't going away, right? Majority of people oppose what Israel's doing. Polls show it. So I'm glad that the establishment is coming down hard on Bob Villain. I'm glad that Reform are disgusted by it because they're exposing themselves of the Israeli apologists that we on the left know they are.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting as well, I don't know if you saw this, but when the articles got released about the criminal proceedings that have now been, sorry, not put forward to them, that they're now investigating, is that they actually opened the case as a public order incident. They expanded, saying that if we have to use other legislation during our investigation regarding, hate crimes or incitement, we will do, which I find really interesting because it kind of shows that it kind of is a grey area what he did, right? So if somebody's turned around and said, Liz Truss, right, she's anti-state, right? If Liz Truss turned around and said, I want to see the death of the Bank of England, I want to see the death of HMRC, right? Just for an example, right? You wouldn't think that she's talking about the death of, Andrew Bailey, the Bank of England, or whoever's in charge of HMRC or any of its workers, right? You wouldn't think that she's talking about killing these people. So I do find that aspect interesting because they're investigating it as a public incident. If they wanted to immediately investigate it as a hate crime, then it would be clear in law that that's what they've done, but it's not clear. And the same with incitement as well. If Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was in the US and she was talking about ICE, who's obviously doing very bad things right now, if she said, I want to see the death of ICE, she's obviously talking about the department, the team, the entire structure of it. She's not talking about the individual people. And again, I'm not trying to just twist this as a pro-Palestinian supporter or a leftist, but it's obviously up to Bob Villain, the duo. Many people just, every time I think of Bob Villain, I obviously just think of the guy who was the main guy on stage, but it's actually a duo. But it's up to him to explain exactly what he means. But again, if somebody said death of the HMRC, I don't think people want to kill HMRC workers. So it'll be interesting how this proceeds legally. It really will be.
Well, Lewis, I mean, you're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, the IDF is an institution, and it would be no different for someone saying death to the Bank of England. It also is a kind of a term of phrase as well. So I think it's far different. I know a lot of I love calling the woke right because they are so sensitive. The woke right keep bringing up Lucy Connolly, right? And they say, well, if she's in prison, then why isn't Bob Villain? Why isn't he being reprimanded? I mean, first of all, right, there is a difference, and I'll tell you what. I mean, this is my perspective anyway. I think what matters is going after power, right? If you're going to tweet something out which says, I don't care if people burn hotels with refugee children inside it, that's calling for incitement on our own streets, by the way, against pretty powerless people. They've done nothing wrong to you, but you're calling for it anyway. That's a big difference as saying, well, I call on the death of an institution about a foreign army. That's not calling for violence on our streets. So I think, of course, the comparisons are wrong. But I've said before, and I'll say it again, I do think that Lucy Connolly's sentence was too long. But there's a difference between calling on violence on everyday people with no means to defend themselves. The IDF, I mean, do you think they can't defend themselves? Of course, they've been backed by the UK and the US, are a powerful army. That's how they can commit their genocide. So,
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to quickly say there is no there is no difference between saying death to Hamas, death to ISIS, and death to the IDF. They're exactly the same, right? Whereas you'll get people in the political establishment, in the corporate media, who will happily say death to Hamas and death to ISIS. And I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that. You should go and say it. You shouldn't be reprimanded for it. Of course not. Just say it. It's fine, whatever. But of course, for them, is if you say death to the IDF, they suddenly lose their minds. Yeah, it's because they support Israel. That's simply, they don't care about the violence or the potential violence involved with it. Because again, they don't care about violence. They don't care about incitement. They care about whether it's their team or not. If we had a scenario with Lucy Connolly and it was a leftist saying about something else, would you have Richard Tice and Rupert Lowe say, we want to free her? Would you have Richard Tice naming a bill after her, calling her to be freed if this was a left-winger? Right? You don't see them talk about Just Boy in the same way, and they were imprisoned, some of them getting 5-year terms, for just planning a protest on Zoom. Planning a protest, not actually protesting. So the massive hypocrisy from the right, we can see it from a mile away. It's not surprising.
And again, I'm not going to give this person any credit, but Wes Streeting was on Victoria Derbyshire, not Victoria Derbyshire. She was on Laura Kuenssberg's show while Victoria Derbyshire was guest hosting. And, he rightfully so, but whether he's just doing this to score political points, said that, yeah, this is bad, what's happened, and I condemn it, but we need to be talking more about what's happening in Gaza right now in the West Bank, which I thought was good. But again, I think he's eyeing up leadership, but that's an entirely different discussion. And the reason that I'm bringing that up is that this happened at the weekend, right? People can interpret it however they want, but let's just summarize the last few days, right? So Friday, we had the report that soldiers have been commanded to actively kill innocent Palestinians, followed up by another story a few hours later where Israel is now being accused of drugging the population of Gaza by hiding oxycodone in the flour, then followed by another drama at the weekend where Bezalel Smotrich, the Minister of Finance, condemned the state for using weapons against Jewish people in the West Bank who were trying to raid a Palestinian village, and specifically said no weapons should be ever used against Jews, inferring that it's fine to use anything against Arabs and Palestinians, but any sort of control or action taken to stop Jews inciting violence, enacting murder, raiding villages should be forbidden in his mind. And this is one of the most senior politicians. This is the guy who controls the money in Israel, right? That's the last few days, but still we're talking about this. I know we're talking about it as well, but we're talking about it in the context and the comparison of the idea is that there is a literal genocide going on. And it's the same thing with Kneecap. It's the same thing now it's going to be with Bob Villan and many other cases, right? And this is just going to continue. And it sickens me. It really, really does. But let's move on to our next story, which, again, somewhat related. It's very much dominating the news cycle right now. So kind of two stories in one here. So this week exposed just how far the British state will go to protect Israel's war machine and criminalize dissent. So the High Court, as you've probably seen in the news today, a judge ruled that it was lawful for the UK to continue exporting F-35 fighter jet parts to Israel, despite the jets being used in a war that's killed tens of thousands of Palestinians. Now, what's interesting is that the court ruled that under our constitution, that acutely sensitive and political issues is a matter for the executive, which is democratically accountable to Parliament and ultimately to the electorate, not for the courts. Now, at the same time, another judge is considering whether to ban Palestine Action, the direct action group that targets UK arms manufacturers complicit in Israeli war crimes. And, they have now rushed to court to try and stop this from happening today. But the message is clear, right? Britain won't just arm a state under investigation for genocide. It will also try and silence those who resist it. Yet voices today from the world of culture, including playwrights and artists, have pushed back, urging the government not to criminalize Palestine Action. They've argued that this is a dangerous slide into repression, where peaceful protest and acts of conscience are met with state crackdowns instead of debate. Now, while Palestinians face bombs, siege, and starvation, British institutions, I cannot get my words out today, British institutions are protecting profits, defending arms deals, and attempting to silence protests. Now, the hypocrisy is staggering, right? Those standing up against the complicity in mass killing are treated as the problem, while the UK's role in enabling that killing is declared perfectly legal. What's also worth noting about this story is that it's not actually a complete defeat, right? So for the government to win their case in the F-35 case, they had to go on record stating that they knew Israel was not complying with international law. Now, The Guardian wrote this: Britain's decision to allow the export of F-35 fighter jet components to Israel, despite accepting they could be used in breach of international humanitarian law in Gaza, and they ruled it was lawful in London's High Court. Now, this does allow us to hold them more accountable, even though we know that they're complicit anyway. It's now on record that they knew, so they can't play dumb in the future. They can't, they themselves say, we didn't know how bad it was, and we didn't really know what was truly going on in the ground because there was no journalist. Who knows? Last week, Keir Starmer was at The Hague for a NATO meeting, and perhaps, maybe, with the acknowledgement in court that they knew that Israel wasn't going to comply with international humanitarian law, if there's any justice in this world, maybe one day he'll be back at The Hague for another reason in the future. Curtis, where do you want to start? Palestine Action, F-35 jets. What are your opinions? What are your thoughts?
Well, Lewis, we've got a lot to talk about there, haven't we? We can talk about Palestine Action. Of course, Palestine Action, we covered this last week, but it's the news of the day, isn't it? That Palestine Action is going to be essentially just prescribed as a terrorist organization, which is wild. I think we know the story there. About the parts, though, I mean, you could say maybe the government is breathing a sigh of relief that this has been ruled unlawful, But does it really mean any much? I mean, there's been so much we can back up with with the international courts, with multiple human rights organizations saying what Israel's doing wrong. So one little legal proceeding is not exactly going to sway people's opinion. Look, you were saying before, could they kind of weaponize their incompetence or pretend that they're naive about what's going on? No. The Labour government and governments before Keir Starmer, US governments and those before Donald Trump know exactly what's going on, right? They know what Israel is doing is wrong. They're not naive, okay? They've heard, I mean, look, Keir Starmer, when he was younger, was part of the Palestinian cause. Of course, maybe it was cynical because he's obviously no longer in support of the Palestinian cause, but he knew what was going on. And I think most people in government know exactly what's going on. They don't agree with Israel, I don't believe. I mean, there are some people like Margaret Hodge, of course, they love what Israel's doing because they are just full-on Zionists. But someone like Keir Starmer understands, yet they won't do anything about it. I don't think it's the case of you get the keys to number 10 and suddenly you become a genocidal maniac. I think there is internal conflicts within these people. Now, obviously, I have the world's smallest violin for them because they're not calling it out. But the reason why they won't delineate from supporting Israel is because it is quite difficult to do. Look, if you are president of the United States or you're UK prime minister, I believe there's a lot of leeway you can do in terms of domestic policy. You can do a lot of things. You can invest in the NHS, you can raise the minimum wage, tax billionaires. You're going to get pushback, of course, from the corporate media, but you can do that. One thing you really can't do is to delineate from Washington, right? Because we don't own our foreign policy. It's in the hands of America, which ironically, when you've got right-wingers talking about taking back control, of course, people like Tice, Farage, Reform, they want to take back control, or not take back control, but give control further to the billionaires, give them more power. And also, they don't want to change anything in terms of foreign policy. So if I were Keir Starmer, what could you do? I would just simply be honest. I would say, look, we are not going to continue to sell weapons to Israel. We are going to call them out on their genocide. And that is going to get me a lot of backlash. Maybe I'll even have to resign because the power is too much. But if he's honest with the people, I think people would definitely respond to it. It would also expose, and I know a lot of people kind of really know this anyway, but it would really expose that we don't have our own foreign policy, that it's dictated by the US. But if a prime minister came out and said that, that'll be news. That could potentially change the dynamics of power between the UK and US. Of course, it would massively upset the US. But at the end of the day, of course, one man can't do much about a genocide, but one powerful prime minister could speak out against it. So what I'm saying is everyone in power knows what Israel's doing is wrong. They're weaponizing the legal system or legal proceedings to pretend that everything's in order, which is why they would use this ruling to say, well, it's legal, so we can do it. Who's that convincing? The Westminster establishment? It keeps the media quiet for a little bit, although to be fair, will the media really press Keir Starmer on foreign policy and the genocide in Palestine? No. But I think, if this was ruled unlawful, of course, it adds more armor to those. More ammo for us to say this is another legal proceeding which shows what Israel is doing is wrong and the UK is doing is wrong. So they will try and shield behind this, but it's not convincing anyone. Majority of people don't really care what the courts say at this point. We can see what's happening. We've seen the videos and we've seen the images. We've heard the human rights organizations. We've heard genocidal scholars. Those who are experts, we've heard Israeli scholars say this is a genocide, this is an ethnic cleansing. So one small legal proceeding isn't going to change much, but of course they will probably use that to cover themselves for a while.
Sorry, I just have to correct you in a second. It's not genocidal scholars, it's scholars of genocide.
Well,
Genocidal
true.
scholars.
Yeah, it probably does sound a bit wrong when you said it that way, but
I
yes.
just want
Yeah.
I just want to make sure there are no genocidal scholars who are supporting Palestinians. Um, yeah, what's interesting is that you are right, and I still do feel like sometimes when it comes to these conversations, we obviously have to place blame on the UK government because ultimately they are the head of a sovereign state that's supposed to be able to make its own decisions. But ultimately, the biggest enemy in all of this, even despite the fact that Israel is committing a genocide, is the US. We are beholden to them. We know from some reporting that Lammy was, excuse me, David Lammy was going to put sanctions on ministers sooner, but they were waiting to see who got elected president. We know that when the ICC arrest warrants were coming up, that it was the US who was pressuring the UK to do all that they can to help stop it, along with some other states. We know that Trump will absolutely sanction people associated with the ICC because he already has. He did it in his last term as well. And we know that people would be punished if they moved away from Israel in a significant way. People who are important, people who Trump has power over, France, Italy, the UK. And again, I don't want to move any responsibility away from our leadership, but it is ultimately what it comes down to. Call me naive. Please do. I do believe in an alternative world. I'm not going to say that they're going to do the right thing. I'm not going to say that, but I do believe in an alternative world without the US being in the picture. I think they probably would have caved into the pressure right now, whether they're complicit in it or not, simply just because the US actually holds us back so much. And again, I was reading the other day that the US was doing more pressuring in the background with the UK regarding some other things to do with Israel. The Middle East Eye have just reported today that the UK government actually tried, apparently, this is according to the Middle East Eye, tried to stop the sales of F-35 parts, but the US wouldn't allow it. Now, whether they want to stop selling the F-35 parts because they actually care or they just want to, give in and win some political points, who knows? We'll never know because they are still complicit regardless of what power is hanging over them or not.
I did want to jump in on that, and that's kind of my point. And of course, I just want to make clear I'm not making any excuses for those in our government. Look, there are a faction of people who completely support what Israel was doing. Then the majority of them have tacit support for what they're doing. But it almost feels like the opinions or the personal opinions of Keir Starmer and his top team is immaterial, because what you've just said there is there was a potential point where the UK wanted to stop the sale of F-35 parts, but the US came in and said you can't do that, which once again shows that we don't have an independent foreign policy. And it takes a strong person. It's not necessarily Keir Starmer, after a long day, taking his tie off and kicking off his shoes saying, well, do you know what? I don't agree with what Israel's doing, so I can sleep sound at night. Doesn't matter, right? Your internal thoughts is immaterial. It's the actions what matter. And of course, if there's not much you can do, because once again, it's virtually impossible for one man to take on the entire establishment when it comes to foreign policy. Taking on the US is not possible, but you can call it out. I think that's a far more powerful statement to say what the US is doing is wrong, and of course what Israel's doing is wrong. We are not going to follow the US like we did before. No, the time is over for us being the little bitch of America. And I tell you what, he will get a lot of people on side from that. And I think a lot of Reform people would be up for that. And I know that the Reform Party is a pro-Israel party. I know attitudes from Reform voters tend to be pro-Israel. But if he can use the angle of taking back control, and one of them is taking back control of our foreign policy, I think that's very, very popular.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we are beholden to them. And again, I just want to emphasize, we're not giving anybody any excuses. I think it's just important to realize that when we're holding our government accountable about their complicity, it is always important to know what is behind that complicity, because without understanding the full levels of power that are involved in these conversations, you can't really fight it unless you understand it. I think that's important to always talk about the US side of things, even from Biden's perspective. He used his administration to pressure the UK, and so has Trump. So that's where we are, and that's unfortunately the reality that we live in. Now, let's. Oh, wait, 1 second, actually. I want to come back to Palestine action really quickly. So I do apologize. I was going to move on. Curtis, can we bring Curtis back on for a second? Curtis, with the Palestine action thing, it will be interesting to see about the High Court rule, the High Court, because they allowed a fast-tracked appearance for Palestine action today. And it will be interesting to see if, again, almost back to Bob Villan, if they can argue this and if it meets the definition of something, right? You can argue about what the definition of terrorism is, whether it is in law, and maybe it might just come down to the F-35 case. It doesn't matter what laws are being broken or not, or what rules have been broken or not. Ultimately, the decision just lies with the state, and it's not a decision for the courts. But maybe it won't be. We don't know. That's not my area at all. But it'll be interesting to see if Palestine Action can actually legally argue that they are not a terrorist organization. They're obviously guilty of doing criminal acts. That's just a fact. They are a direct action group, but the idea that it meets the definition of terrorism, I'll be very interested to see how this turns out in court, unless it just becomes one of them rulings, which is, oh, this is up to Parliament, basically.
Well, Lewis, I mean, it's important to note that Yvette Cooper trying to prescribe Palestine action isn't done out of any sort of legal backing. It's not done from any sort of logical place. It is completely virtue signaling. You know, we saw recently that Keir Starmer wants to become more authoritarian to try and win back reform voters. The man is so out of touch, it hurts, right? I don't know how he comes up with these ideas. I mean, just fix our public services, for God's sake, Keir. So Yvette Cooper is virtue signaling. That's why she's wants to prescribe Palestine action. The definition of terrorism is so incredibly broad that it means nothing anymore. And I think you're right. We need to have some kind of definition of terrorism if we can start prescribing organizations left, right, and center. If we're going to start reprimanding singers at Glastonbury for just making a chant about a military, not a group of people, but a military, then yeah, who knows what the High Court is going to rule? We don't really know at the end of the day. I mean, it's still political. I mean, look, I have far more faith in our courts than do our politicians. Doesn't mean it always goes the right way. Doesn't mean as well. I mean, as we've seen with the ruling of trans people, they can, and I think, make the wrong decision, and that still be called into question. Because in terms of that particular proceedings, no trans people or trans advocacy group was heard in that. So they can be deeply, deeply flawed. But I think it's very, very difficult to have a fair proceeding if we don't even know what terrorism means. And we certainly don't know what it means. I think terrorism these days is being labelled to anyone we don't like. I think that's what's happening. It's a war of attrition. Let's just label people whatever we want. And we'll deal with that. But this was a political calculation from Yvette Cooper. She didn't think, wow, okay, well, you know, I'm just going to go through my legal books and consult my legal experts and say, oh, Palestine Action are terrorists. No, this is an emotive response from her. Now, of course, she's going to try and do her best to make the best case and provide it for the High Court, or those that oppose Palestine Action are going to do their best. There'll be some very good people in there, very intelligent people in there who can probably win it in their favour. But yeah, I think Palestine Action absolutely does have grounds. I think they are going to obviously fight this because it's ridiculous to be called terrorists. And finally, of course, yeah, look, what they did was criminal damage, right? We know that. They know that. And that's fine. That's normal. They're willing to be held accountable for that. But they say, we will be held accountable for criminal damage, but it's worth it. It's worth sparing a bit of paint on some RAF planes while there's a genocide going on.
The one thing I want to quickly talk about as well, or just even mention, it doesn't require any extra commentary unless something comes to mind, but I immediately think of two things, and I'll link these things together. I think of Shamima Begum, and I think of what's happening right now in the US, and I'll tie those things together. So the Shamima Begum case is obviously very controversial. I'm not going to go too much into it, but long story short, the government has the power to essentially destate a person in her circumstances. They have the unilateral power to decide, without actually having to present evidence to a court of her guilt or association, the ability to strip a person of their citizenship under the circumstances that it's dual, and then under the more complicated circumstances of Shamima Begum. That for me is very scary because what stops a person in the future, let's say Nigel Farage, from coming into power and doing it to somebody else? Because that case for Shamima Begum basically came down to this, is that It's just up to the government if they want to do it.
Mm.
Because she didn't go to court at any point and they adjudicated on her guilt. It was just they adjudicated on the power of the Home Secretary. And the reason why I'm tying that back to the US is because Donald Trump is using his power to, quote unquote, fight anti-Semitism, which he's not, to wage an ideological war in many different departments, right? He's using it to try and stop people coming through visas by using AI and cancelling visas and not letting people come into the country if they've said anything bad about Israel or been pro-Palestinian. And then they're using it to wage wars against educational institutions. And it's not in the purpose of fighting anti-Semitism, because Trump does not give two fucks about anti-Semitism. He's using it to leverage his power against educational institutions that he does not agree with. And today, again, he has threatened to completely cut off Harvard in every single way. He already tried to basically hurt the university so much by suspending all foreign students to a university, and they ruled he didn't have that power. But why I'm scared is because the courts have ruled and said that he can do some stuff and he can't do other things. If the court rules that Palestine Action can be labeled a terrorist group, not because the evidence shows that they are, but just because the government can simply do that because they're the government, that then opens the door to more power than what Donald Trump has right now in the US to a future government or even the current government to just start willy-nilly handing out this group's a terrorist group. Oh, protest group for eco stuff, terrorist group. Oh, Palestinian groups on campuses and universities around the UK, terrorist group. Deporting students who are foreign students who are pro-Palestinian. He could do exactly the same, not under the same exact circumstances, because I don't think Nigel Farage is too ideological on that specific topic, but it's scary about the possible power that the government could be handed depending on how stuff like this goes to court. And that's what scares me the most.
I also think it's very ironic because Keir Starmer is supposed to be the human rights lawyer. He loves he loves the law. He is a big international lawman, right? Yeah, I think he'd be very happy with the High Court being politicised, which is something that he's, at least from very few things about Keir Starmer, he's wanted to show that he's a statesman, right? The international law is important. I believe in legal proceedings. God, how that, he throws that out the window, because he'll take look, I don't know much about the internal proceedings of the High Court, but I know, and I think we all know, that it's not shielded from political interference. And I think Keir Starmer would happily take some kind of political interference if it goes his way. He's going to want to see the High Court support the government's decision. And if the High Court doesn't, well, it's bad for his government. It makes them look terrible. But I find that very ironic, because Keir Starmer, if he was in opposition, well, he would not be liking this.
No, he wouldn't be. He wouldn't be at all. He'd be trying to stand up for it and then U-turn on it later. Right, we have to move on because I've spent too much time on that story, even though it is an important one. Let's try and get to our last one and then to the comments. So, the next story. Labour's proposed welfare bill continues to spark fierce internal rebellion. Over 120 MPs, backed by campaigners like Scope and Mind, have threatened to vote against the changes to disability benefits and universal credit. Now, the two core objections is shifting to a two-tier system that excludes future claimants while preserving support only for current recipients. Now, in response, Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall outlined a set of concessions. Now, it's around £3 billion in amendments which now exempt existing PIP claimants, and they link universal credit health top-ups to inflation and allocate around £300 million over the next 3 years for employment support. And she said it's the biggest in a generation. She also established a review of PIP assessments that are now inclusive of disabled voices, something that was previously absent. And this new modelling has come out today saying that the government are now going to put 150,000 more people could fall into relative poverty, which is down from 250,000. So they've made progress, but they're still putting 150,000 people into relative poverty. Now, some key rebels like Vicky Foxcroft, who actually pretty much led the rebellion, argue that the packages still fall short of so many different things, and it calls for deeper engagement with affected communities. But meanwhile, Starmer's repeated retreats on welfare, winter fuel payments, and more have raised concerns about party discipline and coherence, and also his leadership. Now, could we have a leadership competition at some point soon? Could we see a change in leadership? I mentioned Wes Streeting earlier. He sounded like a person talking as if he was going to be running for leader at the weekend when he's being interviewed by the BBC and also on Sky News. Curtis, What do we make of the latest rebellion, the changes, the two-tier system specifically? It seems just very messy.
Yeah, Lewis, there's more bad news for Keir Starmer. He can't seem to get anything right. He has the political nous of a gnat. He's really not good at this. I picked up on what you said about him being competent. He's very incompetent. He can't keep it together. One of the things he said recently was that I'm going to stand up to this rebellion. I'm in touch with the people. I'm not worried at all. Days later, they've already made a massive capitulation. Now, of course, it's better than before, but it's still a terrible bill. You notice it was two-tier. If people claim benefits currently, they can have the old payment package, which is still going to be subject to cuts in the future. If you are someone who claims after a certain date, you're going to get a lower amount of benefits. That's a literal... If you want to talk about two-tier, that's an actual two-tier system, where basically those who are most likely going to be younger, who have disabilities and need help from the government, are going to get less payments. Not because they need less of money. Of course not. People's material conditions don't suddenly change, do they? It's simply because of an arbitrary date. I've heard reports that it wasn't 250,000, but maybe 800,000 people could have been affected by this initial welfare reform. But even still, 150,000 people being affected, it's gross and it's disgusting, right? Once upon a time, we were we'd moved on from this politics. 2015 to 2019, it wasn't just the Labour Party, it was the Conservatives too. Austerity wasn't, cool. We were talking about investment. I mean, even Boris Johnson was talking about uplifting social security. The political Overton window has shifted so much to the right in such a short time. And that has been facilitated exactly by Keir Starmer. Rachel Reeves and Liz Kendall specifically, I mean, this is their kind of politics. This is not based on the last 14 years of economic downturn or the policies from the Conservative. It's not about this 20 billion black hole they talked about. Nothing to do with that, because you can find statements from 2013 of Liz Kendall saying we should cut harder welfare, cut more on welfare than the Conservatives. This is a principle they have. But it's bad news for Keir Starmer because it shows, one, a rebellion within inside the Labour Party, but also, two, it's not a popular policy. I think, yes, there's a lot of right-wing opinions out there. The media probably want to say that the country's turned right-wing, or that they've been saying that for decades. They love saying that. But cutting benefits isn't, popular with the Reform Party. In fact, a recent poll came out that showed, in fact, they were the second most likely group of people who opposed it, down from the Greens. I mean, the Greens were obviously the most likely Green voters, most likely going to oppose this. Reform was second in that, right? And you would think, well, surely these are economically right-wingers. They're not. I think they're, can be convinced to be quite left-wing on economic policy. Obviously, immigration and social issues sort of moves them to the right. So this is, once again, a poor political calculation from Keir Starmer. Then, of course, questions arise of who's going to replace him. I think Wes Streeting is the most likely man. I don't think it's going to be likely it's Rachel Reeves, because why would it? Because she's part of that unpopular package. People dislike Rachel Reeves just as much as Keir Starmer. She's a terrible chancellor. I think we could all see that, and she's hated by both the left and the right. So is Keir Starmer. So Rachel Reeves wouldn't be a good shout. She's also completely devoid of charisma. Not that I think Wes Streeting has much either. I mean, there's a huge lack of talent inside the Labour Party, because that's what happens when you try and pull people from the briefcase wing of the party, when you try and get everyone to look and sound like Keir Starmer. It has no talent. So I think Wes Streeting is gearing this up. He's wanted to be leader. He's wanted to be Prime Minister for a very, very long time. He probably thought about it after Jeremy Corbyn, but I think because Morgan McSweeney chose Keir Starmer, that's what happened. And the reason why Morgan McSweeney chose Keir Starmer is because Wes Streeting was too ideological. Now, it doesn't mean that Morgan McSweeney disagreed with Wes Streeting's policies. Morgan McSweeney is very, very right-wing, but he needed a puppet. He needed someone he could mould in his own image, and that was exactly Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer is a political chameleon. He's devoid of any principles, whereas at least Wes Streeting, well, I wouldn't say principles, probably not the right characterization, but he's firm in his beliefs of privatising the NHS, for example. So I think he wasn't the best suitable candidate that Morgan McSweeney wanted. But of course, it looks like Morgan McSweeney is losing his power inside the Labour Party too. So I think, I mean, I don't know. I don't anticipate a leadership election anytime soon. I think the Labour Party will want to avoid that because it makes them look weak. I mean, only being in government, well, it's 1 year this Friday, actually, that they have a leadership election. That's really not good for the brand image. However, some might argue, get it done now rather than 2-3 years' time where there's a general election looming.
There is also the question of like, what will people remember, right? Because we do this all day, every day. We're consumed with this news, and it's up to us to regularly remind people of the record of every party, whether it's good or bad, right? So we remember these things. The people watching right now probably remember a lot of the bad things that Labour have done. But how many voters who are casual voters, perhaps, still care about the clothing scandal from the beginning of Labour almost a year ago now, right? And I do just wonder about how people will remember what's happening now in 3 to 4 years, because the general population, do have a short-term memory.
I think they will, Lewis. I think they will remember. It's not necessarily that they can pull out the exact details of what happened with Wahid Ali, right? But it's a combination of things happening over time, which makes the image of Keir Starmer look bad, right? Majority of people, I mean, I can't actually think off the top of my head how much money or how much the clothes that were gifted to Starmer and his wife were worth.
Sabrina Carpenter tickets.
And the Sabrina Carpenter tickets, right?
Taylor Swift tickets.
But what people will remember is the fact that Keir Starmer was corrupt, and we had people in his cabinet who were corrupt. People remember these sorts of things. I mean, you still have people talking about Gordon Brown selling off the gold reserves, right? People still remember that Liam Byrne joke that said, "There's no money left."
There's
right?
no money left.
Of course, that wasn't true. It was a joke, but people still remember that. So I think people do have a short-term memory on a lot of things, but I think things that do stick, and what will stick isn't the details, isn't the specifics, but you're not going to have the populace in 3 years' time forget how bad Keir Starmer is. So it's amalgamation of things, all the U-turns. All the policies that are so unpopular. Yes, the corruption. Yes, the tickets and the clothing. Farmers going on strike. Okay, I mean, I actually support the policy of what Keir Starmer's doing.
LGBTQ community as well.
And of course, yes, when it comes to social issues, maybe not for the right, but progressives, those on the left who remember who are absolutely disgusted with the Labour Party, who are going to the Lib Dems and the Greens, they're not going to forgive him either. So I also believe, I mean, maybe this is me just being completely naive now, but I do believe that it seems like anyway that more and more people are becoming more politically engaged. May not always be in the right way, but I do think that people are becoming more and more politically engaged because we're becoming a more polarized world, more polarized country. And I think that the low turnout at the general election wasn't because people weren't engaged in politics, because just a few years earlier, we had 2017 general election, high turnout. We had Brexit, the EU referendum, the highest political turnout of any vote ever. It was just that the last election, no party inspired anyone. I think people are politically engaged a bit more than before. So I disagree that people have short memories now, and I think people are going to remember in 3 or 4 years' time how bad and how unliked Keir Starmer is.
Yeah, and it will be interesting to see what happens at that period. Obviously, there's so many things that can happen between there, and I would love to keep talking about this, but we need to make sure we leave enough time for our commenters. So, what have we got today, Callum?
You need to set yourself on mute first.
I do this every single time. Hi, everybody. Just before we start, there is a little bit of breaking news from Pippa Crerar from The Guardian regarding this final story today. And it's just to, you might remember that I think it was it Meg Hillier that had put forward an amendment to the welfare bill. This was the one that had over 120 people essentially saying they were looking at voting for, which would bring down the bill. It was a reasoned amendment. That was withdrawn after the conversation about concessions, but it's now been announced that Rachel Maskell, one of the most vocal critics of the welfare plans, has put forward a new reasoned amendment, again designed to bring down the bill, and that's currently thought to be backed by about 35 Labour rebels, although organisers suggested more plans to add their names, including MPs from other parties, and the amendment currently has 62 backers. So despite plans from Labour to try and, reason with people and prevent a rebellion on this bill. And most MPs that were planning on voting against would at this point just saying that they were going to plan to
What a bloody mess.
vote
What
down
a
the bill
mess.
at the final vote. But there's now another reasoned amendment being added on. So if that passes, then the bill will be killed dead in the water as well. It really, really is a mess. I've been speaking to some campaigners with DPAC this afternoon. Disabled People Against Cuts, having a conversation with them about the bill. They were holding an action nearby, and I think they're just terrified for what's coming and what it's going to mean. And it's I think many of them are concerned that it's not going to stop. It's not going to stop there either. It's how much further it's going to go. But some of these concessions, like some people have mentioned the fact that, okay, so we talked about the 2-tier thing, and actually there was a brilliant comment about that.
I think I started.
Yeah, you did. It's from Leo. Hi, Leo. Bro heard 2-tier Kia and said, "Hold my beer."
Be a Starmer, don't forget that one as well.
Yeah, there's two things in one there. But the issue here, I mean, Liz Kendall was defending this accusation today in Parliament, and the defence was the fact that there are many people within the benefit system who are on old legacy benefits. They were applied for them in years gone by. They've been getting them since, and the criteria has since changed for new applicants, and older applicants have been kept on the old benefits. And that is true, but the changes to PIP apply for new applicants. So if you are reapplying, if you're due to put in a reapplication, you will be assessed on the old criteria. However, what many people are concerned about, and I wouldn't be surprised if the DWP were to do this, is that if your renewal for the PIP, if your renewal assessment is declined, and it's decided that it's you're no longer eligible, and you then appeal that, you're then effectively starting a new claim. So many people are concerned that even though it won't directly affect people who are already in receipt of PIP, that when they come to have to reapply for their PIP, that those claims will be denied, forcing them to put a new claim in and go through it all from the beginning, at which point they'll be classed as a new applicant.
Yeah, you could also have situations, right, where somebody could be on PIP right now. They could have cancer. They could go into remission. They could go back to work for 3 years. They could get diagnosed with cancer again. Then they go back to try and get back on PIP. And then they might not even be entitled to it, right? Because their type of cancer might just score below the new guidelines. It's completely insane and completely ridiculous. I think what's interesting is that when people transitioned from the old system to the new system, that's different legally speaking, under the sense of it's not the criteria that's necessarily changing. It's just how the system works, how it's paid, because you went from separate systems being consolidated into universal credit. I think it was under Theresa May, right? I don't know the law very well, but from my understanding of certain cases in the past, when it's literally gone to the European Court of Human Rights, you would essentially be creating literally a 2-tier system, which is essentially discriminatory. I can't imagine this not going to the ECHR, because again, it's not just about an old system versus a new system. It's just about two people getting put in different criteria who have the same conditions, which I think would be discriminatory, even under the ECHR. But I don't know.
I think they would argue, though. I mean, by the way, I agree with you. But I think they would try and argue, well, it's not 2-tier because we're just phasing this out. And it would be unfair to reduce benefits in those who are already on there. This is just a new plan we're doing, and we're trying to phase that out. It's wrong, but I think that's where they'll try and defend themselves. Still, though, I don't know if that's going to hold up to legal scrutiny. I think people will still say, but it's a 2-tier system, and this can't be allowed. So I don't know whether that's going to help them or not, but I could see their argument being, it's because we're going to phase it out. We need to make cost savings.
The other really important The other really important issue to bear in mind on this particular story as well is, many campaigners this evening were telling me that, reminding me that any single one of us could need to apply for PIP tomorrow.
Yeah.
Like there are a host of conditions and illnesses that where we could literally go to bed tonight and wake up tomorrow disabled and need to access these benefits. So even though for a lot of people this issue, there are people that are a little bit sort of apathetic to this, who sort of feel like, well, it doesn't affect me. I don't have a disability, but you could wake up tomorrow with one, and people need to remember, and I think people in government need to remember, just how quickly people can end up in a situation where they need this. We hear people talk about you're only one paycheck away from potentially being homeless, or 3 paychecks away, whatever it is. But you could literally be 3 hours away from being disabled for the rest of your life. It just takes one medical episode and that's it. So, it is really important that we find a solution. And clearly, if they think that they're spending too much, if they want reform, look, the benefit system needs reform, particularly around PIP and disability benefit, because at the moment the way that they do it is cruel. It needs reformed. It needs to be kinder to recipients. So I'm all for having a conversation about reforming the system.
Just to clarify, though, in terms of reforming the system, so I've just found the actual summary that I saw earlier. So it's actually not a 2-tier system; it's a 3-tier system, which has been laid out here in the summary. So the way it's going to work, if all these current amendments go through, not including the one that's trying to take it down, current PIP claimants who held to existing descriptors and eligibility requirements, which will still apply for standard and requested reassessments after the 26th of November. Then the second group is new PIP claimants after the 26th of November 2026, who will face the same descriptors but new eligibility requirements with the new 4.8-point system. And then there's a current review going on of PIP called the TIMS review. And then when whatever changes they bring in after autumn 2026, then a third group will then face 3 different descriptors. So we'll have 3 tiers, guys. 3 whole tiers.
It's also worth noting as well about the descriptors. This is what is so disgusting about this, is when we initially covered the reforms, we sort of broke down what does this point system mean? And basically what they're trying to do is make it harder for you to claim, of course. That's not surprising. But one example is, if you can wash half your body but not the rest of your body, that alone was a descriptor. That was a requirement to say, well, clearly it's very difficult for you to clean yourself. You should be eligible to claim PIP. Fine, I agree with that. They've now turned around and said, well, if you can only wash half your body, they don't deem you essentially disabled enough to claim PIP, and you have to have another requirement. And I just think that is absolutely disgusting. If you need someone to help wash you, right, because you don't have the independence to do that yourself, the government doesn't think you're eligible to claim PIP. It is so disgusting. So when people talk about welfare reform, I understand reform is such a triggering word, because even when we say it needs reform, that word reform always means cuts, right? We don't trust many people who say it. But even though we need to reform the welfare system, this is not the way to do it. And someone in the chat, I didn't see the comment, but they said, look, this isn't about getting people into work. This is about penny pitching because we don't want to tax the rich. And it all comes down to that. We don't want to tax the rich. So we're essentially taxing disabled people even further.
One of the campaigners I was speaking to this evening, many of them had signs that said "tax the rich," actually, and they made that same argument, that we should be going after the rich rather than the poorest in society. And I am going to bring another comment up in a moment, but I just wanted to say that somebody I was speaking to this afternoon spoke about the assisted dying bill. She referred to it as a suicide bill, and she said that one concern that she's all in favour of assisted dying if it's to end suffering. But one thing that she's really concerned about is that the assisted dying bill, alongside these cuts to welfare, to specifically around disability benefits, is going to lead to a position where it's easier for people with long-term illnesses or disabilities to look towards ending their life than it will be for them to continue living. And I appreciate that this is a dime bill at the moment. You've got to have 6 months left to live, and there are some safeguards in, even if not the right amount. I'm really on the fence with that particular bill, but the long-term concern is that that's the direction that we're going in, where we're pushing people with long-term illnesses and disabilities to simply say, well, it'll just be easier if I'm not here, and that's a terrifying thought. Katie Marshall, thanks for your comment. My topic: screw the concessions, too little, too late. Read a great story from The Guardian. Costs for disabled people are going to go up 12% before the end of Parliament. Liz Kendall can TOS.
I read about that.
Yeah. What are your thoughts?
People just don't understand the reality as well sometimes when it comes to people with disabilities in lots of ways. I know this is like really niche and it might sound disgusting, but so for example, like my dad has a colostomy bag, right? He had cancer. He's had the colostomy bag now since his mid-40s. And because of that, he has accidents from time to time. He ruins clothes. He ruins bed sheets. It can cause mess as well because he has other neurological disorders and many other illnesses. And it's kind of like the cost of replacing things that are caused by accidents that he has is costly. And this is what PIP is meant to do. You've got people out there, you get them in the UK. Who's ever seen a social media post or a TikTok, which is like, oh, can you help me get this wheelchair that the government won't pay for? There are so many circumstances where people need things that people just don't realize because it's not within their reality that people on PIP get. They're not just getting an extra chunk of money. It's because they do have needs that are beyond the reality that you've ever navigated in, because you may have never, had the opportunity to be around somebody who is disabled. And I've had my dad who's been disabled now since I was like 15, 16. I'm like 32 now. I've seen it. And then my parents adopted a disabled child. So I've seen it even more. I've seen the needs that people have and the extra costs that come with it. And that's what PIP is meant to be for. And it's highly frustrating that people just think it's just an extra chunk of money. It's not. It's desperately needed for a lot of people, and it's still not enough in many cases.
A very good point you're making there, and I think it's obviously true, but it's it shows that there's a velocity between the income gap and your stake in society. So if you're disabled and or poor, things are more expensive. It's expensive to have a disability. It's expensive to be poor. I mean, I'm sure some of us have heard of the analogy where you need to buy a pair of boots, and if you're poor, you can only afford a cheap pair of boots. And if you have money, you can buy an expensive pair of boots, and the expensive pair of boots last longer, right? Your pair of boots have to replace it every so often, and in long term, being poor, you're spending more money, and these extra costs that incurred are not seen by the government. One, because obviously they don't understand, but two, there's this entire discussion around welfare. I would say actually probably beyond welfare. Everything in society is maximum efficiency. We need to make efficiency savings. We need to make our public services efficient. And this is so wrong. I get it in a capitalist business, right? You're trying to keep your company afloat. Not when it's public service. And this is actually a point COG made. You want bloated services. You don't want things running at maximum capacity. The NHS is running at maximum capacity and you lose a member of staff, everything goes to shit. I want my taxpayers' money to go on nurses and doctors sitting on their ass doing nothing as backup than everyone working 12, 14 hours and completely knackered. And if one or two members of staff don't turn up, we're screwed. It's the same with welfare. We need to be really penny pinching. Well, let's calculate how much it costs to be disabled. I mean, I don't even know if calculations are even factored into this. I mean, there's risk assessments, impact assessments that are apparently done. I know actually the last one was done, and it showed.
Yeah, and they ignore them.
These reforms were going to be really, really bad, and they just ignored them.
Because they're harmful.
And they're harmful. But this is the thing. We don't want maximum efficiency, because maximum efficiency says if you're disabled, you can't afford the things that Lewis perfectly laid out. If you have an accident, you need more clothes, you need to buy that. If you're unemployed, and this is why I bring up the point that in Denmark, they have higher welfare payments, yet there's more people in work. I actually believe, and I'm not going to claim this is statistically true because there's not enough data to say this, but I believe, and I think it's a good point, that higher welfare payments probably helps people into work because you need investment in people. If you're going for a job interview, you want a new pair of clothes, nice pair of shoes, maybe a suit. You need to afford that. More and more jobs are working from home, so it's going online. You're going to need a smartphone, a decent laptop to be able to do work from home or look for work. Access to transport, all these things means if you do everything at maximum efficiency, people can't afford to invest in themselves to get a job. If you are disabled and there's unforeseen circumstances that arise because of your disability, you're just pushed into destitution. But for the government, it's all about balancing the books, or it's all about getting the numbers down, and that's all they care about.
Well, hopefully, we'll see what happens. The vote on this bill is tomorrow, so we will see. Hopefully
I'm sure they're all
vote
squirming
down.
right
So,
now.
let's see. I'm just aware of time, so I'm going to do a quick fire on some just to make sure we get through as much as we can. Just shout out to Rachel Atwood for the super chat there for $2. Lewis Aaron is significantly greater than Aaron Lewis from Spain.
I don't know who Stained are, so I don't know.
They're a band. There was a realization in the chat, Lewis, that your name was just Aaron Lewis's name backwards. Shout out to Specs as well for gifting 510 left memberships. So
Thanks,
welcome.
Specs. Specs are always so generous.
Welcome to Martin, welcome to DG, welcome to Kat, welcome to Nikki, and welcome to Lol of the Rings.
Welcome, you're in the cult now.
There's no getting out. So just a couple of things that were interesting. We don't really need to touch on them. I just wanted to sort of highlight them. Let me have a look. Specs said the Reform Green flip-flop voter is way understated. A lot of voters aren't politically engaged, to be fair. A really interesting one from Michael Anson here. By the way, Channel 4 will be airing Gaza Doctors Under Attack on the 2nd of July at 10 p.m. That's the one that the BBC refused to air. There is something that we do want to discuss, but sorry, bear with me. Lots of you commenting about the heat as well. We completely feel that.
I feel like I need another shower, right? And that's not because we're talking about.
Do you know what's really validating as well? Like, it's always the same videos, but it just feels validating every time I see it. It's like anytime there's something like this, all the tourists who come to the UK specifically comment on, oh my god, the Brits were right. When it's 30 degrees here, it's just something different. It's just different. And I feel validated.
Michael's also
humidity as well, which makes things so much worse. I love the sun, and I like that bit of wind. When it's humid, I can't handle it.
It's too much.
My other half is Sicilian, literally like one of the most southern points of Europe, and even he is very much struggling right now. So be validated.
No, it's great. Sorry, I'm just aware of time. Michael's also asked, will there be a special prison for us all when turn left is prescribed, or are we getting split up? I'm sure we won't be prescribed. We're
see you in El Salvador.
We're gonna keep.
We're trying to stream from prison though, right? And when we talk about new studio, it was actually Her Majesty's Prison. That's the new studio.
Listen, I think we need to
in prison though, don't you?
I think we need to worry about that once Nigel Farage is PM and any dissenting media is immediately criminalised. Right, so just on to some more serious topics. I mean, we can kind of look at everything all together. The first two topics. Mark said, people fighting in the IDF, possibly committing war crimes in and out of the country, no questions asked, but utter words against the IDF, and you're deemed a terrorist and questioned by the police. Thoughts on that?
Just a FYI, a British Israeli soldier died today in, I think it was Gaza. I'm just going to let you feel however you want to feel about that.
But also, I think it's funny when, again, I pick out Reform, who see Palestinian flags and say, we want our country back. And they forget that there's many British people or British Israelis have been killed, certainly by the IDF. So I wonder what they want to take from that. They don't really care about our own then, do they, when it comes to Israel?
We got one from JK. How dare they call us terrorists as they look down their guns?
Quite right.
Rachel almost feels bad for David Lammy. He knows his work is bullshit, but he's scared of his own fucking shadow.
Oh, he's such a piece of shit, David Lammy.
He's the biggest. I have a special amount of hatred for David Lammy. And the reason why I have a special hatred for him is because he's probably the biggest chameleon. You know, when Jeremy Corbyn was leader, he was acting like Bernie Grant. You know, real fighter of the cause. He spoke up a lot about racism against black people.
Spoke up for the Uyghurs in China.
He did all these things, and he looked like maybe we've unlocked the potential of David Lammy. But it's simply because Jeremy Corbyn was leader. And that's it. Now, Keir Starmer's leader, he's completely changed everything. His entire DNA has changed, and that will change again, whoever's leader.
Speaking of Corbyn, and speaking of Corbyn and Glastonbury, Mukhtar on Twitter, who famously took on Lawrence Fox, has tweeted an image saying, "I'm old enough to remember this," and it's a headline from The Standard. The BBC defends "Have I got news for you?" joke. Have I got news for you? Over joke about bombing Glastonbury to get rid of Jeremy Corbyn supporters. You remember that was when Corbyn addressed a massive crowd at Glastonbury.
You'll also remember, right? Because Dan Hodges, the journalist from the Daily Mail, journalist, saying that what Bob Villan did is absolutely disgusting. Well, he wrote in the Daily Mail with a picture of Jeremy Corbyn, say, "Kill Vampire Corbyn." And that's talking about, and again, look, and because I'm someone who's largely in favour of free speech, I don't think he should have been reprimanded for that. It's clearly he wasn't actually calling on people to kill Jeremy Corbyn. It was a gross joke, right? But if you're going to go out and say, well, a chant about a military occupation is disgustingly violent, and you're calling on a British MP to be killed, again, I don't think he was seriously doing that. But have some fucking consistency.
Just
which,
FYI,
again, the woke right have zero consistency.
And just again from the reform standpoint, when before the local elections, do you remember the guy who climbed up the tower, the Big Ben?
Big Ben with the Palestinian flag.
Aaron Banks, the funder of Brexit and potential Russian spy, tweeted out that this person should be shot.
Yeah. They
sent back to Palestine in a body bag, just FYI.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that is natural incitement of violence, though, because, that's, I think, certain things you can say it's a crass joke. That is not a crass joke, because there will be people out there who would do that. And it's very descriptive. It was shoot him, put him in a body bag and send him to Palestine. That's an instruction. And again, I'd say, to be fair, if he was punished for that, I wouldn't be particularly opposed to it. But again, where is the consistency from these people? There isn't.
Well, there is none, is there? And someone else pointed out earlier. I've not got the comment now, but it's the right that are always ranting on about free speech, but yeah, they're also the first ones.
And the thing is, I will say as well that the left have been consistent on this, right? Because when people turn around and say, "Well, hold on a second, you're calling out the hypocrisy of the right wing," but the left are hypocrites because they don't think that anything should happen to Kneecap or Bob Villan, but you're happy that Lucy Connolly is in jail. I want to make this point. First of all, when Lucy Connolly, tweeted that, there wasn't really people on the left saying that she should be in prison. There were people attacking her saying she was disgusting, but there wasn't like a mass movement of people on the left saying she should be in prison. Now, once she was in prison, and once she was punished for it, yes, the left, I would say broadly the left aren't particularly against her. But this is what I want to make a point here, is that it's not hypocritical because the left has been honest about where we stand on free speech. The right say they're free speech absolutists. They're absolutely against cancel culture. You can say what you want. You can be offensive. We don't support that. And those of us on the left, again, broadly, because not everyone agrees with this, there's a diverse of opinions on this, but broadly, the left say, we actually do support a limit on free speech, and we've never hidden that. We think you should say pretty much anything, but if you're being racist, bigoted, or you are actually inciting violence, then we do think that should be limited. So at least we're upfront about where we stand on free speech, but the right wing say they're free speech absolutists, but they're anything but.
For what it's worth on this issue, I do think that, saying death to the IDF, until Lewis actually put it this way earlier on, about the IDF as an organisation, as a group, as a movement, rather than individuals. I'd not even thought about it that way. I had taken it as literally, kill them all. And I would argue that is incitement, and I would argue that it's hate speech, but it certainly isn't anti-Semitism, which is what the government, the BBC, and many others are claiming that it is. And I know you made the distinction earlier on, Curtis, about the difference between. I put a rant on TikTok about this earlier about the difference between the IDF and the Jewish people. The IDF are not representative of the Jewish community at all, and actually to infer that they are is in and of itself anti-Semitic. But when you've got the BBC making accusations of anti-Semitism, against I don't know the individual's name from I don't know his personal name, but the guy from Bob Villain who said what he said, when you've got the BBC making those accusations because he said death to the IDF, well, that implies that the BBC believe that all Jewish people are responsible for mass genocide and slaughter of civilians in Gaza, which isn't true and isn't the case at
I mean,
all.
that's what the establishment. Well, half of them think that's true. The other half don't believe that's true. But it's a useful weapon to use, because the weaponization of anti-Semitism is the greatest McCarthyite campaign of our time. This is the era we are in. We will look back on this and say, "Wow, remember the great anti-Semitism McCarthyite campaign, which also hurt Jewish people." So the BBC absolutely, either believe this. I mean, there's many pro-Israel people within the BBC, high up journalists who are supportive of Israel, which is also very ironic because you've got the woke right calling the BBC anti-Semitic because obviously they aired this Glastonbury show, and not to really defend the BBC here, but they weren't going to platform kneecap, right? They could never foresee what the acts were going to say. So to hold the BBC accountable for this is utterly bizarre. Yeah. It's so bizarre. The BBC have not been implicated in this whatsoever. But of course, the woke right are going after them anyway.
Well, I mean, Lisa Nandy was essentially saying that it needs to be looked into as well. And she did say that there shouldn't be an inquiry. She said you don't need an inquiry to know that somebody should have taken it off air. But the thing that gets me with that is, well, why should they have taken it off air? Okay, the nation's public broadcaster. Yes, they have impartiality rules that they're supposed to follow, but the BBC weren't the ones making that chant. It wasn't a newsreader that was there saying it was. It wasn't even Gary Lineker, for God's sake. It wasn't somebody who works or is employed by the BBC. It was a performer on a stage who, at a gig that the BBC happens to be broadcasting. Is it not the responsibility of the public broadcaster to broadcast?
Sorry, can I just quickly point something out as well? By the way,
a
lot of people are getting confused. This was not actually broadcast on television. This was on iPlayer. I just want to clarify that as well, because somebody pointed this out to me earlier. It was not on your mainstream television. You had to have I can't even get my words out.
You had to have tuned in specifically to watch.
You would have tuned in specifically to iPlayer to have seen this. By the way, just FYI, I just want to point that
out. Speaking of impartiality,
wait, hang on. Sorry, Curtis, just hang on, because I wasn't aware of that. So this didn't, because I thought this had gone out on BBC One. So this didn't even go out on the TV. It just went out on the iPlayer.
What I was told earlier by somebody that I trust to tell me the truth. So,
well, I want to. Speaking of impartiality. Speaking of impartiality, wasn't it recently that a BBC newsreader misquoted someone because
Martine Croxall.
The quote was genderless, but she said pregnant woman. I don't know the actual.
Yeah, she corrected it from pregnant people to pregnant woman. Yeah. Even though woman only indicates that adult females can get pregnant. The word,
but that's not even the point. The point was, the quote said pregnant people, right?
Yeah.
So you don't need to attach your personal feelings towards that. She broke the quote to insert her own politics. And of course, the right have cheered her all on. But where was the impartiality there? Again, I mean, most of us, obviously, on this issue agree with us who are watching, but maybe there's some people watching who don't agree. It's not even about where you stand on this issue, right? It's the fact that she literally broke the quote. And of course, she's being praised because obviously a lot of TERFs were loving it. And the BBC wasn't reprimanded for that.
Just a quick one.
Clarify.
I don't have access to my mod powers right now, but can somebody mute the guy who's quoting Bible verses and calling us stinking leftist? Jesus probably would have been a socialist, so enjoy your mute.
Jesus was a communist.
Enjoy your mute. Please, somebody mute him. I'm not having Bible verses.
Just to clarify the early point, I have just double checked it. You are right, Lewis. It went out on BBC iPlayer only. It was a live stream on iPlayer, so it was live. But you had to have so anyone watching that stream specifically went to BBC iPlayer to watch Bob Villain's set.
Yeah.
I mean, he's double his amount of his followers as
I
well.
wonder how many of the people complaining about it, and I am a hypocrite because I have reported certain things to Ofcom on occasion of
Oh, me
programs that I
too.
haven't been watching live. But I do wonder how many of the people that have complained about it were actually watching the stream when it went out, and how many have done it retroactively. I'm just aware of time anyway, so. I mean, it's most people are in agreement. There was one I wanted to just bring up quickly, though. Oh, well, we've got this as well. Again from JK. The young people at Glastonbury are giving me hope that the UK can be saved. The establishment just quashes my hope. But Stanley said, by comparison, if we had, for example, Rod Stewart chant bomb the Russians like Kenny Everett did so many years ago, I think it wouldn't have even made the press. I mean, what are your thoughts on this? There's been a lot of comparisons to, what if they'd have said death to Russians or death to the Russian state.
Well, I said that earlier. I said if someone had said, and people have said it by the way, if someone said death to Hamas and death to ISIS, people wouldn't batter an eyelid. And of course, people should be right to say that. If you want to say it, say it.
I'd be interested to see what that looks like in law. I'd be genuinely interested to see what it looks like. Like, are you allowed to incite violence against a group who is a prescribed terrorist organization versus somebody who might not be a part of a terrorist organization? It'd be very interesting.
Well, that's probably
maybe we should find some people who've said it and report them to the police.
That's the weaponization of the legal system there. So like that could be done, right? But for consistency wise, it's not true. You're right though, Callum. If someone said death to Russians, which by the way is Russophobic, you do not hold all Russians accountable for their government, right? But if that was said on TV, no one would give a shit. In fact, there's many pro-Israel people and many Zionists have said death to Arabs. Where's the same amount of outrage from that? Once again, the Zionists do not care.
No. Well, listen, I'm gonna wrap up there, but thank you so much for all your comments. Just to end, this one from Graham. You can tell it's hot if Curtis isn't wearing one of his fancy blazers.
True.
My little setup here has worked, by the way. I have a fan here, and then I have my little air conditioning unit, which I purchased very recently, to the side, and it's working. I haven't.
We can't hear it.
I haven't sweated at all during this. I love it. I absolutely love it because I've got all these lights and I'm in this tiny little room. So when I record, I get really hot and bothered. So very happy, guys. I'm very happy. I feel very relaxed today because I'm not sweating my tits off. Love to finish on that.
And they're not now, so I'm going to disappear. Thank you both very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Callum. Well, Curtis, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a good show, good discussion. And we'll see what the rest of the week brings up because there's so much news going on right now in terms of, obviously, with the welfare cuts. We've got more news coming out about Israel every other day, and I'm sure we will try our best to stay on top of these topics. But thank you for today. That is it, and it's the end of tonight's show. Thank you to everyone who joined in. Thank you, Curtis. Thank you, Callum. And thank you for all your wonderful comments and to those who gave us YouTube membership and any donations. We will see you again on Wednesday. Thank you so much, and goodbye.
Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.